we're trained to be so externally focused that our intuition muscle has weakened. And I think that comes back to this whole idea of, has technology disabled our ability to be intuitive? And I think it has. I mean, just my own experience and witnessing other people, to me, I don't know if it's technology exactly, but more external focus versus internal focus. This whole projection of our authority onto something outside of ourselves instead of grounding our sense of self and discernment process from within. That doesn't mean you don't use the intellect. It doesn't mean you don't gather information from the outside, but the home of the decision maker is within.
Helena, thank you and welcome to the show. I've been a very big fan of Institute of Noetic Sciences for a long time, ever since first discovering you, I think, on Gaia. Let's start off with, do you want to give, for people who haven't heard of the Institute of Noetic Sciences, a quick overview as to the work that you do and the research you conduct?
Yes, thank you, Paul. It's really wonderful to be here with you today talking about these topics. And so, yeah, the founding of IONS, or the Institute of Noetic Sciences, is really quite fascinating because it begins with an astronaut, Edgar Mitchell, who was actually an Apollo 14 astronaut and the sixth person who walked on the moon. So he had the incredible privilege to be on the moon, to do a job on the moon, and then come home in his capsule back to Earth. And his capsule was spinning 360 degrees, and he could see the stars, the moon, the Earth, the sun. It was all, kind of spinning around. And that brought him to this transcendent state where he felt completely part of everything and that everything was part of him. And as this linear thinking engineer astronaut, that was a new experience for him, and it completely transformed his life. So he came back to Earth and in 1973 founded the Institute of Noetic Sciences to explore, research, educate about this intrinsic interconnectedness of all that is. And we've been doing that for over 50 years now in a variety of different ways.
If anything's going to give you a transcendent experience, it's spinning in outer space, I would imagine. Right. How was it? So when, do you know much about his story when he founded the institute? Was there much kickback from his peers at that time? Because
Yes,
yeah,
yes. My understanding is that there was a lot of kickback from his peers, but I think as we do today, you kind of gravitate towards like-minded thinking individuals. And, this is post 1960s. There was a lot of, I think, opening of people's awareness during that time. So he found himself gravitating towards like-minded thinkers who supported him in the process of developing ions.
so for people who this is their first time hearing about ions, what are some of the main phenomena that you research?
Yeah, so, I'm currently the director of research at IONS, which I'm so blessed to be in that role. And we have a number of research programs. One of them is called IONS X, which is really focused on consciousness and essentially intention and how it affects the physical world. So we're not talking about what we call little c consciousness, am I awake? Am I asleep? Am I under anesthesia? We're talking more about non-local consciousness, or what some people might call big C consciousness, which is this kind of pervasive consciousness that extends beyond the physical brain and the body. And so one thing that we see spontaneously from people's anecdotes, but also in the laboratory, multiple labs around the world have demonstrated that yes, consciousness can affect the physical world. And so we continue those experiments in various ways. So that's one kind of large research program that we're working on. A new, very new uh, program that has started, we're calling IONS Y, which is really about the theory and the models behind why our intention could affect the physical world. So in the past, we've really been more, experimentalists and creating study designs that would evaluate that type of phenomenon. But now we have this more kind of theoretical arm. And then another large program kind of goes beyond the IONS X. It's kind of an umbrella of that, which is all of these, what we think are innate human capacities that go beyond our five senses, what we call the noetic signature, that each person has this unique expression of intuition or psychic ability or ESP or whatever you want to call it, but this experience of accessing information or energy beyond our conventional notions of time and space. And so that really looks very different depending on who you're talking to, whether it's mental telepathy or getting goosebumps when you feel, some people call them truth bumps, being able to get information from distant targets like remote viewing or clairvoyance. So there's a whole diverse um, package of phenomenon that people experience that we test out in the lab, not only to show that they are real phenomenon, but also to try to understand how they work, who can do them, things like that.
I did read that some huge proportion of people would state that they have had some form of extrasensory ability or psi ability. Uh, and from that, from it, so it's quite a large catchment, I assume. Then, if it's from goosebumps to like accurate remote viewing or clairvoyance, from your
Yes, that's
research,
true.
yeah, I was just going to say, is it something that people are? Is it more? Are you discovering more that some people, obviously, like with all things, have a much more innate ability toward one of these skill sets, or it's something we can all develop to quite a high level?
Yes, so we've done a number of studies looking at how common these experiences are, and they're incredibly common. If you took a room of 10 people, probably 8 out of 10 people would say that they've had at least one of these, what I call channeling experiences. And so it is incredibly common. What we see is that people who meditate or have some type of attention training have more of those experiences spontaneously, and they also do better in lab tests. We also see that belief is a
Mm,
strong
yeah.
predictor of the same. So that you believe that these phenomena are real and that you yourself can do them. So that has been demonstrated pretty strongly in lab studies that that's a predictor of good performance. Um, those are kind of the main known predictors right now. We're really curious about genetics to see if there's some genetic component to what your noetic signature is, like maybe even though we all have the capacity for it, maybe there's something about the way your body's made that allows you to do better at remote viewing versus telepathy, say. And I think, from what I've seen, from what I've experienced, from the research that we've done, it does seem like it is a normal curve, like we would see in any other type of skill. You might be born with some innate level of skill, and then depending on, the nurturance that you've had of it or the practice that you've had, you can become quite exceptional or not, in combination with that innate skill. I always give this funny example of NBA basketball. I'm 5'2". I can get a basketball, I can dribble and make a basket, but I'm never going to be a professional basketball player. It's just not part of my genetic makeup. I could practice every day and maybe improve, but I'm never going to be on that end of the curve of exceptional basketball player. So I think we have that same general curve that can be trained with practice in combination with your own innate ability. Kind of shows you where you're going to lie on that curve with any particular type of psi or channeling ability.
It's interesting with more, I guess, more ancient cultures or more where people would be deemed as what we deem as mentally ill with some form of, say, schizophrenia, whereas they would be considered seers uh, in their culture. So, I mean, look, I'm not speaking for absolutely every ancient culture here, but it was interesting that there are definitely people who seem to have a lot thinner curtain between this reality and whatever other realities or dimensions you could perceive, considering on your wiring.
Yeah,
It,
and we don't have a, in the West, we don't really have a context for that now.
no.
So, maybe there is some deeply spiritual aspect to some of the mental health issues that we see today that aren't really being addressed in
Mm,
that way.
yeah. So there's a few things I want to go back and just quickly touch on, but your looking at your CV and where you came from, what drew you toward this work? Come,
So,
I was going to say coming from a more clinical, more traditional, I guess, backdrop of.
yes, yes. So, I was trained as a naturopathic doctor. I was a clinician. I got really interested in going back into research and ended up, getting my clinical research master's and got a NIH grant and was really focused on meditation research. So I was always very interested in mind body medicine and mind body medicine research and what is it about our mental that allows us to influence our health. And I also simultaneously had a very deep personal background of having had these experiences. So, as young as 8, 9, 10 years old, I was personally having these type of experiences, and then went to my grandparents' house when I was 10 years old for what some people might call a spiritualist seance, where my uncle and grandmother, went into trance and would speak in a voice that wasn't theirs and would, provide content that, didn't seem like it really came from them. So we called that experience trance channeling, where the trance channeler believes that some spirit or helper, guide, non-physical being is speaking, using their body to speak through them. So those meetings happened every weekend at my grandparents' house, and I basically grew up in a spiritualist worldview that we are more than our bodies, that we have this spirit soul, that we can interact with non-physical beings. And that was very much in the closet and did not intersect at all with my clinical or academic life. I really saw them as separate. And, as a meditation researcher in academia, I heard about a meeting that they were having at IONS, and it was called The Future of Meditation. And someone said, you need to be at this meeting because you're a meditation researcher, and they're doing really cool stuff. And so they were really concerned with how meditation was being treated in Western research and medicine because it was very secularized and made very objective physicalist and kind of removed any of the spiritual or transcendent aspects of it. And so this work group of meditation researchers were brought together by IONS, and I got to go to this. It was fantastic, asking how do we pull those pieces back in? How do we evaluate those in a rigorous way? And when I got to IONS, I was completely amazed that they were willing to ask these esoteric research questions. Because I was like, how can you do that? Like, that's, would be death in academia. It would just basically, I couldn't imagine being out of the closet. And I saw all of these people out of the closet, which really amazed me. So I became very inspired to join the IONS team and started a dialogue with them, and was able to join as a consultant and then join on the research team. And then eventually here I am it's actually almost exactly 10 years today that I joined IONS. And then I became a director in February
Yeah,
um,
wow.
10 years ago. Yeah, so pretty incredible. And so, it's the first time that I feel like my personal self, I'm out of the closet. Everyone knows now. In fact, one person when I joined IONS was like, this is going to kill your academic career. I'm like, okay, well, it is what it is.
Charming.
Um, and now I can use rigorous science and all the training methods I have to apply it to these research questions. Yeah.
Because I see irons as taking up such a pivotal role in bridging the gap between the materialistic and the spiritual for people who, because I've got a lot of friends who are tippy-toed and they're sort of more heavy on the materialistic worldview, but they do have a toe in the spiritual, for want of a better word. They've had experiences that we alluded to before, some experience of some extrasensory phenomena, or that there's more to life. But they still need, like, I'm the kind of person, I'm pretty much, I've had direct experience with this stuff. I'm fairly all in on, like, I mean, to a degree. You want to have discernment when someone's telling you they're channeling someone. You've got to use a bit of your own inner knowing. But I just see it as such, if you can actually show people the research of this work, it's, you've got far more chance of them going deeper themselves.
Yes.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, this was quite amazing to me because I was in the closet, I had no clue that there was any research done on that topic at all. Like when I came to IONS and I found out about parapsychology and the Parapsychology Association and, all of this research that's been done since the 1800s. I mean, we have over 150 years worth of incredibly rigorous research that have been done on this phenomenon that hardly anybody knows about.
Just doesn't get
Or
published.
if they do know about it, they just like dismiss it out of hand without actually digging in and
Yeah.
seeing the quality of the work because it just doesn't fit their worldview. So that to me is very sad. And I think part of our mission to educate people about that. It's like, hey, there actually has already been work done on this, and there continues to be more. It's a bit of a being a translator, right? Because some people say, oh, well, why are you trying to fit it into this physicalist worldview? But I don't think that's true. I mean, I feel like science is actually a verb, it's a method, and
Yeah.
it's an incredible method to be able to answer research questions. And so, how do we apply that beautiful method to these questions about these phenomenon?
I think all of science ends up leading back to this phenomena too. Like the ultimate question of we don't actually know. I mean, other than we learn things and it's a continual
Yeah,
experiment. I guess in the public lexicon, more of the science is considered a bit more dogmatic to the
yeah.
people actually conducting the science. Would
Well, what's fascinating is, the more I do this, the more I see how challenging it is to actually incorporate all the various aspects that we need to consider. So, because the physicalist worldview is reductionistic, there's this idea that if you account for all the variables, then you're going to get a clear black and white answer, right?
mm, yeah,
And what we're seeing, not just in parapsychology, but in psychology and other fields now, like with this whole replication crisis, is that that's not always true. It's not black and white, and that's actually, in my mind, supporting this idea of interconnectedness, and that it's not just the straight cause and effect of physical aspects, that there's all these other pieces that we can't possibly take into account in our controlled studies that are influencing the experiments, and we can't possibly get the same thing because when you do it again, some of these, non-physical aspects may be at play that we can't even observe or notice or capture or control for.
Mm. I mean, how does that then tie in? I'm thinking of the observer effect and people's own perceptions dictating the outcome of any given situation or study. So you mentioned before belief. So if someone vehemently doesn't believe that this exists, then it's not going to exist for you. I mean, you literally can't perceive things that you don't believe in.
Yeah. Exactly. So, you know, our current physicalist human mind would say, well, something either exists or it doesn't. Like there's just like this grounded truth of it's there or it's not there. And the idea that my belief about something would change that is like unheard of, right? But maybe that's how reality actually is, that my perceptions, my intention, my, you know, I call it worldview, actually is reflected back in what I see. And, we actually, I mean, bringing this back around to health, we see this in the
Healing.
body and,
Yeah.
in P&I, we just see it over and over again with how the mind influences our physical body. There have been some really cool experiments where using hypnosis or, various shifts in people's thought patterns and how that affects the human body.
I think it's up. I was reading studies that they did back in the early 90s on visualization and health. So seeing yourself as well. I think it was a 30% increase in healing. Something that no drug could touch in terms of if you believed you were well. And then obviously the other really glaringly obvious thing to mention here is the placebo effect. That still gets brushed aside when you're doing clinical trials with drugs. It's like, it's just a placebo, like, just a placebo, just the body healed itself without the need for any of this stuff.
I
Like,
know.
it's kind of hilarious.
I
Like that
know.
that's what you should be studying.
Exactly. That surprised me too, because it's right. Exactly. I say that all the time. They say it's just the placebo and brush it aside instead of saying, wait a minute, how do we
Yeah.
maximize the placebo effect? Because it's getting effect sizes similar to some of these interventions.
Yeah.
Um, and it doesn't have any side effects and it doesn't cost anything. So let's get that going. And
Yeah.
well, actually, maybe that's why they
Hence why
don't
it's not
don't do
studied.
that.
Yeah. Hence why it's
Yeah.
not studied. I just want to
Yeah,
so
I think, sorry, one of the most compelling examples I saw of the mind influencing the body was, I can't remember who the author was, but there was some case studies of multiple personality disorder.
I've read these.
And
These are
when,
fascinating. Yeah.
yeah, I don't know if that's ringing a bell for you, but when they were in one personality, they were a diabetic, with
Yeah.
this particular pathology, and then when they were in the other personality, it was like completely gone. And to me, that is just incredible, right?
Well,
I mean, that is such a clear example of how our mind can affect the physical world.
I spoke to someone who was a clinical psychologist who dealt with split personality disorder, and they said they saw such things as eye color change and moles appear and disappear. Like the level of belief was that intense. Yeah.
Right?
Um.
I mean,
Yeah.
that's
Unbelievable.
amazing.
Well, it ties into, see, we accept, I believe there's more acceptance of this belief structure when people apply it to materialism again. If you say, well, you've got to fake it until you make it, you've got to think yourself wealthy until you become wealthy, you've got to people do it in sports all the time. You visualize yourself winning the race. Uh, so we obviously have this knowledge innately of our beliefs impacting the way our reality exists for us. So it's not. I don't personally see then why it's such a stretch to go. Well, you're channeling some. I don't know, a loved one from the other side, or perhaps you in another reality, in another dimension, into quantum. So, but as you
I think
said, it.
I think that's a bigger jump. I think it's a bigger jump. I think people have an easier time saying, okay, maybe there's some mechanism that could exist that, like, if my child is in danger, that I would pick up some mental or physical impression about that. Maybe not understanding how that might work, but some evolutionary reason why there could be pressure for that. Like, so I'm just was trying to think of an example for telepathy, or let's say, remote viewing or clairvoyance. Like, there would be an evolutionary advantage to know where the buffalo were if you um, didn't have GPS, like, to be able to survive, to know just intuitively where the food sources were. So I think it's an easier stretch for a physicalist who's had those experiences to kind of move over there. But when you get into distinct non-physical beings, whether it's deceased people or guides or angels or etc., that I think is another big jump that people have a harder time making.
But it has been documented. I mean, I'm just thinking of every major religion has some sort of
Yeah,
example of that,
most
as you'd
most of
frame
the
it.
major religions have been founded on some type of prophecy or channeled content.
Yeah, which is, with them, I'm thinking the opposite of that. It's probably largely then why you get someone who looks at religions and just think that's they're an anathema because of the harm they've caused. So now I'm just
Yeah,
going to be a strict, atheist based in materialism because all this other stuff leads to uh, faith, which is unprovable. I guess would be. I'm thinking of my dad. In
sure.
terms of, but look, I get. I understand that argument, but I guess it seems so. From my perspective, it seems so extreme to then rule out these other possibilities for what human beings are, because it's again, it's coming from the point of view as if we know empirically that no, human beings have these abilities and that's it.
Right.
Yeah. With your studies, I just want to go back to something you mentioned at the beginning with the studies of intention and its effects on consciousness. Is there any preliminary findings in terms of you mentioned why it's having an effect? Because I've heard so much about how it does have an effect, but that's fascinating.
Yes. Um, yes, there's not a lot um, in terms of understanding how it works. There have been many, many studies trying to demonstrate it. And so we use this model called the ATOM model, ATOM. So the O is the operator, which is the person who is directing their intention. The T is the target. So the target is what the intention is being directed towards, whether it's a cell in a petri dish or a plant or an animal or a person or a probabilistic system like a random number generator or an optical system like a stream of photons or something like that. The target can essentially be anything, and it's people have tried many, many, many different types of target that we direct our intention towards. And then the A is the analysis, which is, is there some type of analysis of these interactions that can give us any insight into how it works or how to maximize it. And then the M is a moderator. So if I'm an operator in New York City, is my intention affecting something going to be different than if that same person is on a vortex in Sedona on a full moon? So, so what are the things surrounding that operator target relationship
Yeah.
that can influence it? So that's the model that we've been working on. And our chief scientist, Dean Radin, is, the primary mover and shaker around that. And those are mostly on experiments where the operator is consciously intending. So they know they're intending, they're focusing their attention with intention to make something shift. And we don't really know exactly why and how it's working. But when you think about the idea that we're all interconnected, the idea of quantum entanglement, of informational systems, of fields, these are all kind of pieces that are slowly, coming together to perhaps help us explain. But, doing it in a kind of traditional physicalist way, I don't think we're going to find the answer there. I think it's going to be beyond that. And some people argue and say, well, maybe it's still physicalist, but it's something physical that we haven't been able to describe or observe yet. Anyway, I know we always like throwing things into
These
buckets
boxes.
and giving them names. Um, so that's kind of the short answer to the why in this moment. But I also want to mention there's another aspect to this intention piece, which is, how does consciousness affect the physical world when we aren't purposefully intending? So there's this really large project called the Global Consciousness Project that's been going for a couple of decades now, started by Roger Nelson at the Princeton Engineering and Anomalies Research Lab. The acronym is PAIR. I may have gotten those words slightly off. But IONS was the administrative home of that for those decades. And now HeartMath has kind of taken over the lead and is doing Global Consciousness Project 2.0 or GCP 2.0. And so this is looking at undirected consciousness. And so they have these random number generators, which are the target. They have these devices all over the world, and it's continuously collecting data. And this data is random noise, meaning that it should always be random. There's really nothing that should make it move away from randomness. And yet, what we see is in moments when humanity is charged up about something, whether it's positive or negative, we see deviations from randomness in these random systems. So I'm explaining this in a very, very superficial, simplistic way. There's a lot more kind of nuances built into that. But I wanted to give you those two examples of how we can study how consciousness affects the physical world. So one is this very intentful, conscious way, and the other is this undirected, unconscious way of how consciousness can influence these devices. And so when you think about that, that is so profound in my mind that, what everybody is thinking, feeling can influence at this kind of massive level. And, what if we actually coordinated and
Yeah.
cooperated
Yeah.
in a positive way? Could it shift things in a positive way? Sorry, I know I didn't answer your question,
No,
but
no, no,
I
you
think
no, I was
there's
just
some
saying,
good stuff in there.
no, no, I'm just thinking of the Maharishi effect, and
Yes,
you must know
exactly.
Lynn McTaggart's work with intention, and
Yes,
so for people who don't know
yes.
that, that's small groups of people meditating on lowering crime, for example, or peace, and it having a enormous effect on the actual crime rate in the cities where they've done this. And do you know, I mean, I can't remember what the percentage is of people, it might be 10 people who are affecting a city of 4 million. That
Yes.
it's that fewer people having an intention of peace can create systemic effects on the community at large.
Yes, it was 10% and then 1% and then square root of 1%. So
1%.
the last study that the uh, university there focused on that with transcendental meditation, did a very, um, it was a longitudinal study where they looked at all these different metrics like crime and murder and drug use, etc., over time. And when the number of meditators reached that, square root of 1% of the population that they were studying, you see this clear line of it just dropping. And then that continued for the time that they were meditating. And then, the project ended and they all had to leave. And then it
Went back
just kind
up.
of crept up again.
Yeah.
Many of them didn't go back to the original baseline. Um, but
Yeah.
yeah, it was quite interesting to see that. And critics will say, "Oh, well, there's so many other things that were happening at that time,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
maybe other things could be affecting it." It would be really great to see, to figure out how to do that in a more controlled way, so we can just quiet
It
those
isolate everything else.
critical voices.
Yeah, it definitely also speaks to change the world. Changing the world begins with you changing yourself. Like that for me is a clear example of you becoming a peaceful person yourself changes everything around you, rather than the current
Yes,
model of go out there and enact violence on others to create peace, which doesn't seem to work.
yes,
Surprisingly.
yes.
I just want to share very quickly before, because I'd love to talk technology with you to finish, but I've been meditating a lot, particularly over the last few years, like much more so than usual. And I've begun to experience for myself a lot of precognition. So I had yesterday when I go for a run every other day, and I saw very clearly a snake in my mind. Well, I thought it, and then a minute later there was a huge python across the path, which is fine because pythons aren't dangerous. And then I thought of, well, unless you're a small marsupial, and they're very dangerous. But then I pictured someone I knew who works in a cafe near me, and then lo and behold, a minute later they walk past this usually quite quiet trail. So I've become hypersensitive to it. It starts to make you very aware of your thoughts and what you are projecting, because just to have direct experience of, and I'm sure most people have had some variation of that. Say, I mean, the common one is I thought of somebody and then they called me. That's usually a common one. But I've had a lot more of that happening, as you mentioned, people who meditate, like it's those kind of abilities seem to be becoming more dialed up, which is somewhat also worrying when you think when you're in a negative or bad mood, what else am I creating, which is rippling out.
Yes, thank you so much for sharing that. I think that's a very common experience. And, most people, as their awareness and skills start developing, usually they'll naturally start asking themselves, well, how do I manage that? How do I control that in some way? Because there's sometimes when it's appropriate to be receiving this extrasensory information, and there's other times where I really don't want it to come in. So, and some people might say that some types of mental illness, which we talked about in the beginning, is like an
Stimulation of that.
overwhelming
Yeah.
amount of information, because those boundaries are not allowing them to be functional in their daily life, because they can't distinguish what's self and not self. And there's all this information coming in. And so, I think that there's a natural inclination to then want to know more about how to develop your own ability to do that, and the, I don't want to say proper, because I best practices for energetic management of those abilities.
We'll speak after the podcast. I'm just-
I'm actually teaching a class right now called The Best Practices of Channeling through the Shift Network. And
Oh, great.
there are many teachers. I'm not saying I'm the only person who does this. I think using your own intuition to find a helper or guide or supporter to, just offer you um, kind of a held hand, if you will, as you go down your path of your own self discovery. And, I think it does take some discernment because I'm definitely not into people who put themselves on pedestals and say, oh, this is the only way and this is, you have to do my way and I'm the best, etc. Because I don't think this process is about ego at all, but that, there are definitely resources out there to learn to do that,
What would,
especially around the empaths. I don't
yeah,
know, maybe you've experienced that in your health arena, just this idea of being an empath beyond the normal, empathy for other people, actually feeling
yeah.
other people's emotions and realizing, oh, this is actually not my stuff. So there's a lot more classes and trainings on those I've seen recently.
Just because you mentioned it, I'll share one other very quick thing because it's quite incredible. I've got someone who's very close to me who's recently had health issues with their heart, and I wear an aura ring, so I've got all my metrics of my heart rate. So I do a lot of athletic stuff, so I like to. Look, I'm obsessed with data, it's so I know what my resting heart rate is generally, which is and then when this person got became ill and then experienced probably 4 weeks of being quite ill and then started to recover, my heart rate raised by about 15% over
Mm.
the exact same period, which is really, and I'm thinking, I'm not doing anything different with my training. I'm not eating anything differently. My sleep is the same. Why on earth has my heart rate gone up? It, do I have myocarditis or something? Like this is bizarre. And then once I knew they were better, that's starting to recover. My heart rate the same day that night dropped once again to its usual. And I'm just like, that is like either I'm in completely imagining this, but the timing was perfect.
Yes,
Yeah.
yes. It's very common. And, um, from what I've learned and experienced myself, often once you realize that that's what's happening and you acknowledge it, then the effect dissipates. So let's say your friend has a migraine and all of a sudden you
I
get a
don't want
migraine.
that.
You're like, oh
Yeah.
my God, why do I have this migraine? Why do I have this migraine? And then you realize, oh, so and so has a migraine. And then you say, okay, thank you. I get that I'm just feeling their stuff, blah, blah, blah. And then it goes away. You aren't
Yeah.
feeling that because you're intending essentially for a separation. And so it's this really interesting dynamic between, okay, if we all are interconnected and
Yeah.
one, how do we manage the porousness? Because right now I'm living in this individual little separate suit, right?
So I
And
think.
so it may be helpful and functional to pick up certain information to support me in navigating my life and making decisions. And yet it's not functional to have too much or particular type from other people, and really being able to learn that energetic management. But I really think it first starts with awareness and intention and knowing thyself. And again, that meditation practice is like, okay, you're so tuned into your heart rate that you knew something's off. You didn't know quite what it was, but you're like, I know something's not the same here. So what's going on there? Anyway, it's fascinating.
What it also reminds me of intergenerational trauma, which is a lot of research around that the
Yeah.
cells store the memory of your ancestors. And people who have like just crazy phobias that have no rhyme or reason, like being hyper claustrophobic, and then they find out that their great grandfather died in a war camp in a box or something horrific. But as you
Yeah.
mentioned, as soon as they realize what that connection is, they can actually release it.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. It's
It's
amazing.
it's funny how we do think we are so. I mean, we are to a very large degree these individual separate souls having this experience, but then as we've mentioned and you mentioned with all of these random generators and our awareness as a collective feeding into those, how sort of individual are we really? Like
Right.
we like to think we are,
Right.
but really, I mean, we're also very conditioned by our culture, by our family, by our friends, all these things where we think we're acting autonomously when we're actually sort of more adhering to a cultural structure or a larger body of consciousness.
Yes.
Yeah,
And I think that's so empowering, actually, to know, like, if everyone just automatically understood that their thoughts, feelings, emotions affected other people, I think there would be a massive amount of chaos at first. But then we would be forced to learn how to be more impeccable with our thoughts, emotions, etc. Um, so in the long run, I think it would benefit us to have that innate knowing that that was a reality.
mm. It'd change everything, wouldn't it? Once you realize that even the thoughts you were thinking were contributing to the chaos of the world.
Right.
Yeah,
Well, I mean, anyway, we could totally go down that rabbit hole, but we won't. But I'll just mention the fear, how there's so much narratives of fear that are pumped out into our social media and media. And that dramatically affects people's well-being.
yeah. And you get addicted
Yeah.
to it. If you look at, I don't know if you've noticed, like, 'cause I used to quite enjoy YouTube for a lot of reasons, for a lot of learning things and podcasts and so on. I mean, obviously, don't skip over my podcast if you're watching it on YouTube. But I've just found that the level of clickbait and the outrage and the polarity is increasing. It's become far more like what it used to consider itself against, which was the mainstream media, which does that. We all know that. But now, even on the so-called spiritual side, you get these. I just see so many. I don't know, like, is this the end kind of headers and, this is what's coming, all of
Yeah.
this kind of it, just because it just feeds into people's addictions of, we are all addicted to that negative bias to some degree because it kept us alive. But
Yeah.
yeah, I don't see things changing until we start to release that fear of what's to come and actually be a bit more present.
Yeah, and I also think that, it's strengthening that internal discernment muscle, that
Yeah.
intuitive capacity to be able to have a discernment of like, okay, this is coming towards me. Do I resonate with it? Is this something that's going to support me or not support me? And if it's not, then I just, let it go and, don't give it any attention. And yet we're trained to be so externally focused that our kind of intuition muscle has weakened. And I think that comes back to what I think you were really interested in connecting about, this whole idea of technology, and how has technology disabled our ability to be intuitive. And I think it has. I mean, just my own experience and witnessing other people, to me, I don't know if it's technology exactly, but more external focus versus internal focus. This whole projection of our authority onto something outside of ourselves, instead of grounding our kind of sense of self and discernment process from within. That doesn't mean you don't use the intellect. It doesn't mean you don't gather information from the outside, but the sort of home of the decision maker is within rather
Mm.
than without. And as far as I know, I don't really know a lot of studies that have been done around that. But we did one study looking at the interaction of genetics, specifically the genetics of psychic abilities and the technological advancement. Shall I share a little bit about that
No,
study?
I'd love to hear this because I'll just give a quick frame for people. The reason, one of the main reasons I reached out was because I saw this study which you're about to mention, And it ties into the doomsday narratives around AI and this over hyper focus on technology and people sort of positing what they think consciousness is and whether this technology is conscious and so on, which is another discussion. But what I found fascinating, which is you're about to go into, is that is this, as a question, is this technology and overuse of technology down-regulating our abilities to access these higher states of what it is to be a human being?
Yeah, that's great. So we were curious about that too. So this study was looking at the genetics of psychic ability. It was a very, very small pilot preliminary study. So we had about, I think it was 14 high functioning psychics, meaning that they were vetted as having psychic abilities and they had family history of people with similar skills. And then we had 10 age, gender, and racially matched controls of people who had no psychic abilities and did not have any family history of psychic ability either. And interesting side note, it was really hard to find the controls. It was very, very difficult to
Mm,
find people with no
no,
abilities,
yeah.
no experiences, and no family history. Anyway, we got the DNA from the cases and controls, and we found a very interesting finding on the non-coding region of chromosome 7. And non-coding means they used to be called junk DNA. So it actually doesn't code for a specific protein. It's in the part around that that people now believe regulate genetic expression in some way. So this part of the non-coding DNA was the original wild type form in the psychics and was in a mutated form in the controls.
Jesus, yeah.
So this suggests that the psychic ability is kind of our original capacity, and some sort of evolutionary pressure pushed it away from that. So that's what we found in our small pilot study. So our collaborator was really curious about what this looked like in the larger genetic databases. So, there's these huge genetic databases that have thousands of people who've contributed their genomes, and they found that this wild type, I'll, I'll call it the wild type original version, was very highly expressed in the population. I can't remember exactly, but it was like 75-80% of the people in these large databases had the original wild type form of the psychics. We also looked at the relationship of how this related to two things. One was Christianity, the spread of Christianity, because we know that people who expressed psychic traits were killed for a very long period of human history.
Yeah.
So that would be a very strong evolutionary pressure to get rid of that part of the DNA. And we did see a relationship between the spread of Christianity and this mutation. And then the second analysis we did was kind of related to my buffalo story, was, would more technologically advanced populations have mutated more towards the non-psychic because they wouldn't need to intuit where the buffalo were because they had their GPS or whatever. I'm
No,
drastically
no, no, I know,
simplifying
no, it's
this
good. Yeah.
example, but we also saw a relationship there. And so this is definitely not definitive research, but it's very compelling. And we were hoping it would generate research funds so that we could raise money to do more studies on it, but we haven't been able to do that yet. So if any listeners know of any funders that are curious about this, we'd love to do more research on it. So that's kind of the story of that study, that there is kind of really compelling findings around this, but they're very, very preliminary, and I wouldn't feel comfortable saying yes, technology, downgrades our ability to do that. But I definitely want to do more studies to see if those results will pan out again.
It feels to me intuitively correct to a degree, just from my own experience of when you spend a lot of time in nature, and then you come back to answering your emails endlessly.
Yes.
Yeah, you feel like
Yes.
you've tapped out of something into something very different. It's like, I can't remember what the university was that ran, it was one of the big ones. People who used ChatGPT have been shown to be losing IQ points
Oh, jeez. That's really sad.
because they're outsourcing. Well, if you think you're
Well,
just outsourcing a lot of the stuff you previously just have to, keep your
yeah.
brain well oiled.
Yeah. I guess I would argue that,
It's not
technology and
binary.
AI are incredible tools,
Yeah.
right? And we have to bring conscious intention awareness to how we're going to use the tool, right? Um, and I think there's a responsible, beneficial way of using it. And then there's probably extreme ways that aren't healthful or improve our quality of life, but actually detract from it. And so, anything we can do to bring that conscious awareness to everything we're doing, I think is going to help us navigate this incredibly transformational time that our culture is in right now.
Hmm. On that, to finish, where do you feel we are as a species? I'll finish with a small question that you can easily sum up in a sentence. But with everything, with all the work that you do that you're doing, how do you feel? Do you feel we are on the edge of just discovering or rediscovering the magic that it is to be a human being? That these things are actually our birthright, and they've been pushed to the side or just unexplored due to the culture.
You've caught me on a great day, Paul. Today, I feel incredibly
Oh,
hopeful.
yeah,
I
it's good.
really do. I feel really hopeful. And I think that it is confusing times because it feels like there's two or more different narratives going on. There's such an
So much.
upwelling of people who are awakening and exploring and really open and curious about their human potential and how to better themselves and better their communities. And then simultaneously, we have all this apocalyptic,
Yeah,
horror in terms of violence and wars and, the way people are treating each other. And it's like happening in parallel, right? And so, I feel like at some point, we reach that tipping point where it's going to shift. But maybe it's naive, but in this moment, that is my hope and what I'm envisioning. And if our consciousness really can affect the physical world, then that is the future that I'm envisioning, that we will have this knowingness that we're interconnected, that we will be mindful and consciously aware of our thoughts and how that affects ourselves and others, and all the beautiful things that could evolve from that.
I also feel a lot of what you mentioned, the horror and the contrast which is currently present. Like, unless you're actually living in one of those places which is under war or some awful regime, which I'm not belittling it at all, but a lot of it, particularly for people who potentially listening to this podcast, that is switch offable by simply not tuning in to the people giving you that message, because
Yes.
it's creating a hyper focus on what is not emblematic of what's happening in humanity at large.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I mean,
So are you saying that people can just tune it out?
I'm not meaning just tune it out. I just mean a lot of the. It's like if you watched the news every night, you would think the world was ending. Like, you'd literally
Right.
think the world was ending. You think the climate's just about to
Yes.
collapse. You think World War III is just about to break out. That America, for whatever side you're on, is about to lose its democracy. Like, all of these narratives that keep you tuned in, and then bang, they hit you with an ad, or like
Right.
whatever that is. Like, you can you have the ability to channel your focus somewhere else. into
Yes.
the world you want to be, want to see, or at least try and make yourself not in that same frequency of negativity.
Yes, yes. And I guess for me, it's not to like spiritually bypass all the horror, to look
No,
away or
that's
put our head in the sand. It's to hold it all, to say, yes, that is also happening as well. What is mine to do in that, whatever that looks like for you, what's mine to do to support that? But at a minimum, you know, if we hold the idea as an assumption that our consciousness matters, that our intention makes a difference in the physical world, and that if we feed the negativity with that consciousness and intention, it feeds it. And if we envision something different, something positive, then perhaps that actually can affect the world in a physical way. It's like this subtle, sacred, spiritual activism, if you will, to hold to hold it all, and yet um, set the intention for what you want to manifest in a positive way. We didn't get into the whole positive healing intention studies and all that, but there's a lot of studies that have shown that our positive healing intention makes a difference on cells, plants, animals, people. And those effects are small, but they're absolutely there. They absolutely make a difference. And so, can we apply that to our world that's like massively suffering right now?
I guess that's where I was coming from. I don't think by adding to the trauma of it, by you making yourself feel worse, is this is going to create the change, as opposed to
Exactly.
feeling empowered that you can make a change no matter how small, and it doesn't need to start with a war that you have no control over, in terms of like
Yes.
like practically, like logistically, maybe energetically, but it begins. I just feel for myself, it all begins at home. Like if you can make a small change to someone else's life here, or an animal's life here, or not step on that flower, whatever that is, that's all adding to a sensitivity toward a gentler world that's not so based in polarity.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Absolutely. How am I at war within myself?
that's the. I was
How do
leading to
I
that.
play the
Yeah,
victim? How do I play the tyrant? Even those small ways, bringing awareness to that, I think is incredibly powerful.
yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for your time, particularly at the end of a busy day. Uh, I will leave all everything in the show notes to find ions in your work. Is there any other places you'd like to direct people to? You mentioned your teaching.
Thank you so much, Paul. Yeah, our website, noetic.org, I think is the best place for people to begin to learn all about our work. We have our publications there and ongoing research studies that people can participate in. We're doing a really fun one right now on telepathy, and mental impressions and physical impressions from a emotionally bonded loved one. So lots of room for people to participate in that. And just look forward to continuing this conversation in general and in our community if you care to join us. And just, it's been a pleasure connecting with you on all these topics.
Thank you.